Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to the essay on self-reliance by Emerson, and today we're going to finish off the remaining slides, the remaining material, and finally be able to say that we are rid of Emerson and go on to something else in American literature. The American literature subject, and in the last few lectures that we've had, we've been discussing Emerson's views on self-reliance, and just to give you a quick recap of what we did in the last lecture, Emerson pointed out certain examples with the help of which he's trying to improve that we must rely on the individual, we must depend on our own abilities and not go looking for help outside of ourselves or outside of our space. Amongst these examples are some examples that are related to philosophy. There are examples that are from literature, from the arts, and all these examples set out to prove just one point that Emerson is trying to make here, and that is that we must be able to depend on our own resources. Whatever we are doing here and now is what is important. What happened in the past is dead and gone and buried, and what is in the future is yet to come. So we must not only discard what is in the past, we must also do away with the habit of standing on tiptoe, as he says, and trying to visualize the future. So Emerson gives us various examples, and in giving us these examples, I have tried to contextualize what Emerson is saying, so that we sitting here in Pakistan, and especially students who are exposed to Emerson for the first time, realize that Emerson is not just talking about the young people in America, but this is something that goes out to young people across the world, no matter where you are. Some of the things that he says we can relate with, particularly when he says that we are very easily impressed by what is happening in other countries or what you can see in other countries, and we forget that we have the same thing at home in our own country, and in doing so Emerson stresses the fact that we must learn to rely on our own selves. We must have confidence in ourselves, and we must be able to do everything possible in order to make the best of our country and in order to make the best of our world. He gives various examples, and in doing that, one of the things that he points out to is the habit of Americans to be very easily impressed by what they see in Europe particularly. He mentions a few countries. He mentions England, he mentions Italy and Greece and Egypt. And he says that human beings are very easily impressed, and they disregard what is available for them and to them in their own country when they look to other places. So in one of the previous sections that we discussed in class, I had pointed out Emerson's statement where he says, let us not rove, let us not go around the world trying to see what the world holds. Let us concentrate on our own self, the here and the now, this present moment, this present place, and see what we can do, and not be looking back at what our ancestors did or what the great philosophers in Greece did. Let us not go thinking about what the Italians made. Let us think of what Americans are doing and what we can do to make America great. So whatever you are studying here, remember, it is not just about America. You have only to take that situation and apply it to yourself to know how well it applies to young people, particularly throughout the world, whether they are in Pakistan or Bangladesh or India or wherever. So Emerson's writing is supposed to be for Americans, but it is universal in its theme. It's universal in the sense that he wants the young men particularly to rely on their own abilities and not be very easily impressed by someone just because he happens to have come from another country or someone who wrote in another day and age. The here and the now is what is important for Emerson. So let us see what he has in this final section of the essay, and we'll be discussing each point as Emerson brings it out. So he's been talking about roaming around in the world and going to Europe, going to Egypt, and he has said that if it is for art or for studies, it's fine. I don't disagree that in case of art and in order to study you should go to Europe or you should go to other countries. But he says if you're going for entertainment, remember that you will not be able to find anything that is different from what you have in the United States. In Thebes, in Palmyra, his will and mind have become old and dilapidated as he carries ruins to ruins. So in order to connect this with the previous lesson, if you remember, he's talking about the person who travels to Greece or who travels to Italy and who thinks that he is going to a different world, but who, essentially speaking, stays in the same world. Traveling is a fool's paradise. Our first journey discovers to us the indifference of places. And this is something that is, that's a point that Emerson is making in great detail. He emphasizes this a lot. And he says, at home I dream that at Naples, at Rome, I can be intoxicated with beauty and lose my sadness. So I pack my trunk, embrace my friends, say goodbye to them, embark on the sea, and wake up in Naples. And there beside me is the stern fact, the sad self, unrelenting, identical, that I fled from. I seek the Vatican and the palaces. I affect to be intoxicated with sights and suggestions, but I am not intoxicated. My giant goes with me wherever I go. So one of the most important points that he's making here is that traveling is a fool's paradise. Only a fool thinks that he will be able to appreciate beauty in Thebes or in Naples or in Rome. He says, wherever I go, I remain the same. I do not change. If I think that I'm going to appreciate beauty more in Naples and in Rome, that is a figment of my imagination. That is self-deception. I stay the same. I do not change because I move out from my own country. I stay the same. So if I think that I'm going to appreciate beauty more in Naples or in Rome, I am only deceiving myself. He says, I go to the Vatican and I say that I'm going to see beauty there. I'm going to become very religious there because the Vatican is the seat of the Roman Catholic Church. It's where you have the Pope. But he says, just because I go to the Vatican, I do not become more religious. I stay the same. And I perceive things in the same way. I can read all the brochures, I can read all the travel and the tour guides, but that does not make me more religious. It does not make me appreciate beauty more. I remain the same. And so this very important point that he is trying to make is the misconception that Americans have that traveling broadens your horizons. He says you need to get that out of your mind because traveling is a fool's paradise. And the rage of traveling is a symptom of a deeper unsoundness affecting the whole intellectual action. The intellect is vagabond, and our system of education fosters restlessness. Our minds travel when our bodies are forced to stay at home. We imitate. And what is imitation but the traveling of the mind? Okay. So he says the rage of traveling is a symptom of an unsound mind. In other words, what he's trying to say is that only mad people travel. He's being very polite about it when he says that it shows unsoundness of the mind. Unsoundness of the mind is what you call a person who is mad. So he says that the intellect is vagabond, the intellect has run away. And our education system fosters this restlessness or this myth that traveling broadens your horizons, that traveling educates you because you get different experiences. According to him, the experiences are no different from those that you get sitting at home in the United States, in your own house, in your own city. And so you don't need to go out, because when we are traveling, we imitate. We are not being ourselves. We are imitating what hundreds and thousands and millions of other people have done and are doing. So if we go to Greece, for example, we are imitating what millions of tourists do, because for a place like Greece, the tourist industry is one of the biggest industries. People come to see places. People come to see places because everybody else goes to see those places, not because they can perceive something important or not because they can perceive something beautiful, but it is what the Americans say, the done thing. So they do Europe. They go and visit the places which the travel itinerary or the tour guide says are good places, are worth seeing. They don't see those places because they think that those places are beautiful or interesting. They see them because the tour guide tells them, because the flyers and the booklets that they have bought, they tell them that this is a beautiful place. The individual may think differently. So, according to Emerson, traveling is a fool's paradise. And then he goes on further with this emphasis on reliance on the self, on what is American, and not going out to Europe or to other countries of the world. So he says, our very houses are built with foreign taste. Our shelves are garnished with foreign ornaments. Our opinions, our tastes, our faculties lean and follow the past and the distant, not the here and the now, but the past and the distant. The soul created the arts wherever they have flourished. It was in his own mind that the artist sought his model. It was an application of his own thought to the thing to be done and the conditions to be observed. So he says the problem with us Americans is that we are too fond of other countries. We are too fond of other times. We live in the past or we live in the future, but we need to live in the present. And when he refers to houses being built with foreign taste, it's foreign technology, it's foreign materials. He says the very ornaments, the very decoration pieces that we have sitting on our shelves, we are proud to say that this thing came from Italy, or this came from Greece, or this decoration piece I bought in England. So it's that decorates our houses. There's nothing American about it. So he says our tastes, our faculties, our will leans towards the distant and the past, not towards the here and the now. And according to him, the soul created the art. The artist does not look at what people before him have done or people around the world have done. The artist creates what he wants to, and he creates it in the manner in which he wants to. He doesn't look at what is happening in another part of the world. He sees the materials that he has, he sees the idea that he gets, and he puts that idea in the form of paper or in the form of a sculpture or perhaps in the form of a dance or music. The artist creates what he feels he should create. He doesn't create what he thinks other people have created and that he needs to copy, because that would be imitation, that would not be creativity. Okay, so, and why do we need to copy the Doric or the Gothic model? Again, a reference to Greece and Egypt. He says, beauty, convenience, grandeur of thought, and quaint expression are as near to us as to any. And if the American artist will study with hope and love the precise thing to be done by him, considering the climate, the soil, the length of the day, the wants of the people, the habit and form of the government, he will create a house in which all these will find themselves fitted, and taste and sentiment will be satisfied also. Okay, so he says we don't need to copy what has been done in another part of the world. We don't need to copy what has been done by another person in another time. We need to work with the materials at hand, and he's talking specifically about artists here, and he says we need to seek inspiration from within ourselves, not from the outside world, not from reading about the past or looking at things that had been made by past artists. We need to see what materials we have at hand. We need to see the space that we have, the resources that are available to us, the time that is available to us. And then only can we create. And once we have created, we'll see that this is the best. And it is not to be compared with what was created at another time, in another age, and in another place. And the gist of his argument is in this sentence: insist on yourself, never imitate. This is the gist of the essay. Your own gift you can present every moment with the cumulative force of a whole life's cultivation, but of the adopted talent of another you have only an extemporaneous half possession. That which each can do best, none but his maker can teach him. No man yet knows what it is, nor can, till that person has exhibited it. Okay, so he says our artists are the best, only they have to believe in themselves. They have to have that confidence. They have to rely on the materials that are available to them. And once they set out to do their work, once they set out to create a work of art, they will not be held back by lack of resources, because you can only produce that which you feel to be the best. If you imitate, you will forever be beholden to another individual, and you will not be able to exercise it as you can your own talent. An adopted talent stays an adopted talent. It does not become your talent. It stays an adopted talent. And he says that the best that an artist can do is what the maker has taught him, not what another teacher has taught him, not what reading about other poets and philosophers and theorists will teach him. So the best that he can do is what he has been taught by the maker. Whatever his innate abilities are, those are the best. And then he moves on and he says, where is the master who could have taught Shakespeare? Where is the master who could have instructed Franklin or Washington or Bacon or Newton? Every great man is a unique. So he's making unique out to be a noun here. The Scipionism of Scipio is precisely that part he could not borrow. Shakespeare will never be made by the study of Shakespeare. Very important points. Do that which is assigned to you, and you cannot hope too much or dare too much. So, stick to what you have, use your own resources, do what you can in the time that is allotted to you, because if you study Shakespeare, you will not become Shakespeare. Shakespeare did not study anyone to become great. And here, of course, I have a slight difference with Emerson, because you have to remember that Shakespeare did borrow from other writers. He did borrow stories that had already been performed as plays. You have the example of the story of King Lear, for example. You have the story of Hamlet. You have so many other stories in King Henry IV, King Henry V. He was borrowing from history books. He was basing his plays on plays that had already been performed. The very famous The Merchant of Venice, for example, was the character of Shylock was based on the character of the Jew Barabbas in The Jew of Malta. And so many others of his plays were based on stories that his audiences were already familiar with. So this is something that I disagree with Emerson here, but that is not to say that there is no validity in his other points. He says that nobody could have taught Benjamin Franklin or George Washington or Francis Bacon or Isaac Newton. These are all great people. They had great minds, but they made the most of the intellect, the talent, the abilities that they were possessed with. They did not go looking around at other people in other times, in other places, in order to invent or to create or to present what is the best. Every great man is a unique. So if you want to be great, you will have to do something that is different, something that is specifically your individual work and not copy work, not imitation. The Scipionism of Scipio is precisely that part he could not borrow. So the great people are great because they're dependent on their own resources, on their own selves, and not on what other people could provide them, not on what other countries could do for them. So do that which is assigned to you, and you cannot hope too much or dare too much. There is at this moment for you an utterance brave and grand as that of the colossal chisel of Phidias, or troll of the Egyptians, or Moses, or Dante. Not possibly will the soul, all rich, all eloquent, with thousand-cloven tongue, deign to repeat itself. But if you can hear what these patriarchs say, surely you can reply to them in the same pitch of voice. For the ear and the tongue are two organs of one nature. Abide in the simple and noble regions of thy life, obey thy heart, and thou shalt reproduce the foreworld again. Okay. So he says that you need to remember that these great people did not follow the example of anyone else. They were great because they depended on their own abilities. And then he brings the conversation round to the Egyptians and the Italians. He brings in the story of Moses, and he says that that is something that he depended on himself. He did not need an intermediary. he had to present his ideas in such a way that they were individual, that they were unique in characteristics. But if you can hear what these patriarchs say, you can answer them in the same pitch of voice. In other words, you don't have to be impressed by them. You don't have to be, let's say, suppressed by them. You can listen to them and then obey your heart. Just do what your heart tells you to, and not what other people tell you to. As our religion, our education, our art look abroad, so does our spirit of society. All men plume themselves on the improvement of society, and no one improves. So people talk about religion, they talk about what's going wrong with religion, and in America, you know, you have what is termed big religion, where you have all the money, where all the donations are given. So as our religion, our education, our art look to other countries, so does our spirit of society. So we keep on thinking, and the we, remember, refers to the Americans. He says we keep on thinking of what is happening in Europe. We keep on thinking that in Europe you have certain welfare states, and you have very good support groups. But he says we need to remember that we can only be separate from Europe and other countries if we give the same importance to our religion, our education, and our art. Okay? So when he says that like art and education, society also looks towards Europe, he's talking about this impression that Americans have that everything that's happening in Europe is better than what is happening in America. And you know, it's rather strange, because Americans want to travel to Europe and Europeans want to travel to the United States. So it's whatever you have is not enough for you. And he says that as far as society goes, everybody keeps on saying that we need to improve society, but nobody makes any headway. Nobody takes the initiative. And you know, this again reminds me of something that that we as Pakistanis lack also. We keep on saying that we need to improve ourselves and society has become very bad, but we never do anything to improve the situation. We talk about groups, we talk about systems, but we don't see what the individual is doing, what you are doing for this society. Society never advances. It recedes as fast on one side as it gains on the other. And you'll see how he explains that. He says, society undergoes continual changes. It is barbarous, it is civilized, it is Christianized, it is rich, it's scientific. Anyway, so it goes through these different changes, because this change is just a change that is superficial. He says there is no amelioration. There is no turning back of time. Everything that is given, something is taken. Society acquires new arts and loses old instincts. So, society itself needs to make an effort. In other words, individuals need to make an effort in order to make sure that their society becomes as good as European society. What a contrast! And here he presents a very different image to the ones that he's been presenting so far. He says, what a contrast between the well-clad, reading, writing, thinking American with a watch, a pencil, and a bill of exchange in his pocket, The bill of exchange, of course, is currency, is paper money. And the naked New Zealander, whose property is a club, a spear, a mat, and an undivided 20th of a shed to sleep under. Just imagine, you have a small shed, it's divided into 20 booths, and each booth or each cubicle is occupied by one New Zealander when he wants to go off to sleep. So he gives you this comparison of an American and a New Zealander, because that's what Americans try to do all the time, imitate people in other countries and in other cultures. So he presents this comparison of a reading, writing, thinking American and a New Zealander who carries a spear, a club, a mat rolled up, and who just has a small place to sleep in. Now, why does he present this comparison? He says, compare the health of the two men. If you compare the health of the two men, you will see that the white man has lost his aboriginal strength. Basically, all human beings had the same strength. But what happened to the white man is that he lost his strength. If the traveler tells us truly, strike the savage with a broad axe, and here he makes you this sort of experiment, and he says, if you strike the New Zealander with an axe, the New Zealander's flesh will be healed within a day or two. You strike a white man with the same axe and he'll probably die. That is how sensitive the white man has become. And then the white man or the civilized man are synonymous. And he says the civilized man has become a coach, has built a coach, but has lost the use of his feet. How many of us are willing to walk to work or to walk to school? Hardly anyone. Most prefer to ride. So he says that the civilized man has built a coach but has lost the use of his feet. So who is going to drive the coach, and where is he going to go? If he cannot walk, what is the point of traveling? He has a fine Geneva watch, but he fails of the skill to tell the hour by the sun. Because he has this watch, because I have a clock in front of me, I know what time it is. I don't have to look outside and see whether the sun has started to set yet or not. So he says that the modern man has a fine Geneva watch, but he cannot tell what time it is by just looking at the heavens. He can't do that. A Greenwich nautical mile almanac he has, and so being sure of the information when he wants it, the man in the street does not know a star in the sky. So in spite of the fact that the man in the street has a Greenwich manual which gives you the times of everything, it gives you the time that the sun sets, the time that the sun is supposed to rise, it tells you let's say when it is midday, when it is noon, or the rest of it. But he says that the person who has this manual does not know a single star in the sky. It's not only stars that he doesn't know about. He doesn't observe the solstice, he doesn't know about the equinox, and the whole bright calendar of the year is without a dial in his mind. He just cannot place anything if he has to depend on himself. He is so hemmed in by all these gadgets, he's so surrounded by all this technology that he does not depend on himself. He cannot do anything because all his faculties have been compromised. He has become so dependent on other things like calendars and He doesn't know how to depend on himself, how to use his own resources. And then Emerson makes a claim, and he says his notebooks impair his memory, his libraries overload his wit, the insurance office increases the number of accidents. You know how that one goes. I'll come back to that in a while. And it may be a question whether machinery does not encumber, whether we have not lost of refinement some energy by a Christianity entrenched in establishment and forms, some vigor of wild virtue. For every Stoic was a Stoic, but in Christendom, where is the Christian? So according to him, dependence on a notebook has compromised man's memory. Dependence on a library has overloaded his wit. And of course, you know that if you are working with an insurance office, there are likely to be more accidents than if there were no life insurance. And of course he says that machinery encumbers. Now this is something that you'll see yourself. You ride a bus or you ride a car and you slowly lose the use of your legs. You do not use your mind and you slowly rust. So the question that comes to his mind is whether the Americans have not lost in this revolution of technology, in what he calls a Christianity entrenched in establishment and forms. So this is something that he says the individuals need to focus on, what their abilities are and how best they can utilize them. There is no more deviation in the moral standard than in the standard of height or bulk. No greater men are now than ever were. Okay, let's look at this statement. He says that you do not have any great men in the world today. A singular equality may be observed between great men of the first and of the last ages. Nor can all the science, art, religion and philosophy of the 19th century avail to educate greater men than Plutarch's heroes 3 or 4 and 20 centuries ago. Not in time is the race progressive. Okay, so he says there is no guarantee that what was written, what was created in the 19th century was better than what is being created in the 20th century, because the work that is being done now is being done keeping the present scenario in mind. The themes, the style are going to be different. But what needs to be remembered is that we cannot put our head on the shoulder and be looking back all the time. Phocians, Socrates, Anaxagoras, Diogenes are great men, but they leave no class. They were great because they depended on their own selves, their own abilities. He who is really of their class will not be called by the name, but will be his own man, and in his turn the founder of a sect. So what he's trying to say is that people who follow these great philosophers like Socrates and Anaxagoras and Diogenes are not associated with them. They're reading their works, but they will never become Socrates. They will never become Diogenes. They will stay who they are, no matter what they read, no matter what path they follow. The harm of the improved machinery may compensate its good. Now, this is an idea that you need to think about. We have a lot of machinery nowadays. We have a lot of what we call progress in technology, but you need to remember that all this technology also has its downside, also has its harms. You think about let's say pesticides and insecticides and preservatives. These are three things that are playing havoc with our health in Pakistan. These are things which played havoc with the health of Americans and people in the Western Hemisphere before they were thrown into developing countries like Pakistan. And so you say that you have a bumper crop, you have more wheat than you've ever had, you have a wonderful quantity of rice or maize or any of the other grains. And yet, when you look at the side effects, you have all these pesticides that are causing diseases because they are harmful for your health. These are chemicals that are being introduced into your body. You think of the technological progress, you think of let's say buses that have been made, or cars that have been made, or aeroplanes that have been made. Fine, they have a big plus point, they have some value in our society, in our daily lives. But you think of how dependent human beings have become on them. You take this computer. Emerson did not have the computer, he didn't have the cell phone. But if you take this to be improved machinery, you think of how it is affecting your intellectual and physical abilities. Men have learned to use technology, but they have forgotten the use of their body. They have forgotten the use of their mind. They're not trying to remember anything now. They have become totally dependent on computers and on technical devices. So Hudson and Bering, he says, accomplished a lot in their fishing boat, and they accomplished so much that Perry and Franklin, whose equipment exhausted the resources of science and art, were astonished. So without any tech support, as we call it these days, they managed to discover what Perry and Franklin could not. Galileo, with an opera glass, discovered more stars in the heavens, and that's something that modern men, with all the technology at their disposal, have not been able to do. Columbus found the New World in an undecked boat. There was nothing beautiful about the boat. But it is curious to see the periodical disuse and perishing of means and machinery which were introduced with loud laudation a few years or centuries before. Now, technology is something that keeps on changing. You keep getting new machines. So a computer, let's say, that is considered the best and the fastest speed in 2014 will become obsolete in 2016 or maybe even 2015. So there's nothing to say that this is something that will or that can persevere. So we invent machines and then we discard them because we have newer machines. We think that we have made improvement in war, in the art of war, as he calls it, and yet he says Napoleon conquered all of Europe, and all that he based his conquests or his triumphs on are, and this has to be listened to very carefully, his instructions were that his armies would not be able to do anything at all until The soldier receives his supply of corn, grinds it in his hand mill, and bakes his bread himself. In other words, until the soldier becomes totally independent, there will be no war, there will be no conquest. So in other words, the soldier must learn to rely on his own resources. The soldier must learn to rely on his innate abilities and not look for outside support, not look for what his fellow soldiers can do for him or what his commanding officer can do for him. Because society is a wave. The wave moves onward, but the water of which it is composed does not. Remember, this is just an illusion that the water is also moving. The water stays where it was. The same particle does not rise from the valley to the ridge. Very important points. As unity is only phenomenal, the persons who make up a nation today, next year die, and their experience with them. So then he brings it to the personal level, and he says that nobody dies with another individual. You might say that you're going to die if you don't get a particular person, but what happens actually is that people who make up a nation today, people who are willing and living today, tomorrow they will die, their experience, their knowledge will die with them unless it is preserved. And so the reliance on property, including the reliance on governments which protect it, is the want of self-reliance. So what he's saying is that this reliance on property, including the reliance on government which protect it, is the want of self-reliance. You rely on property, you rely on a government only when you don't rely on yourself. Only when you have doubts about your own abilities or your capacities to protect your own property do you depend on the government. So according to Emerson, men have looked away from themselves and at things so long that they have come to esteem the religious, learned and civil institutions as guards of property, and they deprecate assaults on these because they feel them to be assaults on property. So this reliance on property, what does everyone have? How much property do you have? How much land does so-and-so have? How much money do I have? This is what Emerson is coming down to. And he says that unless we learn to depend less on property, we will not be able to make any progress at all. It is because we value property so much that we value governments and civil institutions so much, because we think that these institutions will safeguard our property. And we identify ourselves with our property. We do not identify ourselves with our abilities. We rely on religious institutions, on learned institutions, because we are concerned all the time with our property. What do I own? It's that sense of possession which Emerson is trying to do away with. It's that sense of ownership, this selfishness that we have, that what I own is better and has to be better than what so-and-so owns. So the measure of esteem of each other is not by what one is, but by what one has. How much property do you have? How much money do you have? Where is your property? How many houses do you have? How much land do you possess? This is what identifies us. So we are known by what we have, not by what we are, not by what we can do, not by how we can perform, but what do we own. So it's this property that has become the measure of our esteem. We respect each other not because of what an individual can do, but because of what an individual possesses, because of the land or the number of houses or the number of cars or the quality of the cell phone that he possesses. Not because of what that person can do. This is something Emerson says that is the undoing of Americans. And especially he hates what he has if he sees that it is accidental, came to him by inheritance or gift or crime. Then he feels that it is not having, it does not belong to him, has no root in him, and merely lies there because no revolution or no robber takes it away. So this reliance on property is what we need to do away with, because a cultivated man becomes ashamed of his property when he develops a new respect for his nature, and then he will hate what he has. He will hate if he has inherited property, if he has been gifted property, if he has stolen property, because he knows that it does not belong to him. But that which a man is does always by necessity acquire, and what the man acquires is living property. It does not wait the beck of rulers or mobs or revolutions or fire or storm or bankruptcies, but perpetually renews itself wherever the man breathes. So there is a difference in living property and lifeless property. Living property is what a man acquires because of necessity, and this property that a man acquires, these abilities, the capacity to do something, to work, this is something that cannot be taken away by a mob. It cannot be stolen from you. It's not something that the government can summon back. It's not something that can be destroyed by fire or a storm or any other vagaries of nature, because that is something that you have as an individual, that you possess and which cannot be taken away from you. Thy lot or portion of life, and strange, very strange, in this portion, Emerson quotes Hazrat Ali. He says, thy lot or portion of life, says Caliph Ali, is seeking after thee. Therefore, be at rest from seeking after it. So he is quoting one of the sayings of the companion of the Prophet, one of the Khulafai Rashidin, and he says, whatever you get in life, you will get in life. Do not seek for it. You'll get it because it is fated. You will get it because it is deemed to be for you. Do not go running after it. It will come to you. Our dependence on these foreign goods, and Emerson takes a turn and he comes back to foreign goods, and he says our dependence on these foreign goods leads us to our slavish respect for numbers. How much? How many? The political parties meet in numerous conventions, and he gives you an example from contemporary politics, and he says the greater the concourse, And with each new arrival, there is a new announcement, and it says the delegation from Essex, the Democrats from New Hampshire, the Whigs of Maine. And the young politician feels stronger than before because he's got all these people voting for him. He's got all these people praising him. He has the support of all these people. But, Emerson says, not so, O friends, will the God deign to enter and inhabit you, but by a method precisely the reverse. In other words, when you stop depending on numbers, on ownership, on property, then and then only will you get your reward. So all these delegations as they come in, the Whigs of Maine, the Democrats from New Hampshire, etc., etc., he says that the young politician feels stronger when he realizes that his numbers are increasing, the number of votes, the number of people in his party are increasing. But this is something that must be treated with a lot of care, because mere numbers cannot make you into a great politician. In fact, it is just the opposite. As he says, by a method precisely the reverse. It's only as a man puts off all foreign support and stands alone that I see him to be strong and to prevail. So it is only when the politician stands by himself, when he sees what he himself is, that he will be able to prevail. He is weaker by every recruit to his banner. Each additional voter makes him weak, because then he is depending on his voters. Then he is not depending on himself and his innate abilities. Is not a man better than a town? Now this is a very, very strange question that Emerson puts, because he's trying to prove the point that greater numbers do not contribute to greater strength, because he says that the more people you have on your side, the more you will be relying on them, the less you will be using your own abilities and your own faculties. So he who knows that power is inborn, that he is weak because he has looked for good out of him and elsewhere, and so perceiving throws himself unhesitatingly on his thought, instantly rights himself, stands in the erect position, commands his limbs, works miracles, just as a man who stands on his feet is stronger than a man who stands on his head. What a comparison Emerson brings in. So he says, he who knows that power is inborn becomes weaker when he looks for outside support. He has to realize that the power is in himself. The power is not in the multitudes. The power is not in all these voters who are coming to him. The power is in himself. He has the ability, he has the capacities, and he has to use them. If he does not, and if he starts depending on voters and on other people, then he will not be able to do anything at all. And Emerson compares him to a man who stands on his own feet. The man who stands on his own feet is far better, and he is in a position to combat the world instead of the man who's standing on his head, because the man who's standing on his head is not balanced. He cannot retain his balance, whereas the man who's standing on his feet has them firmly planted on the ground, and he's able to walk, to run, to lift things, to pull, to push, He can do everything if he's standing on his feet, but if he's standing on his head, he will not be able to do anything. He'll become totally dependent on other people. So use all that is called fortune. Most men gamble with her and gain all and lose all as her wheel rolls. But do thou leave as unlawful these winnings and deal with cause and effect, the chancellors of God. In the will, work and acquire, and thou hast chained the wheel of chance, and shalt sit hereafter out of fear from her rotations. So, if you gamble with fortune, then you are tied. But if you depend on yourself, if you depend on cause and effect, and do not leave anything to chance, then you will ensure that you'll be able to do your work. But if you gamble, then you are leaving everything to chance. You might win, you might lose everything. In order to control fortune, you need to depend on yourself. You need to do your own work and not rely on other people to do your work for you. A political victory, a rise of rents, the recovery of your sick, or the return of your absent friend, or some other favorable event raises your spirits, and you think good days are preparing for you. Do not believe it. Nothing can bring you peace but yourself. Nothing can bring you peace but the triumph of principles. Now this is the last slide. Let me explain this before we go back to recapping what we have done in this lesson today. So he says, if you have a political victory, if you get more money, if your sick people get well, you think that you are strong because you have people around you, you have money, you have the support of your family, you can defeat through sheer numbers. But he says, don't believe that. This is something that is very temporary. Your good days are not preparing for you if a friend comes back, or if you get a political victory in Maine, or if you get a lot of money. These things will not help you. These things will not support you. What will support you is consciousness of your own abilities. What will support you is dependence on your own will, on your own abilities. It is not through numbers that you will win. It is through a triumph of your principles. That is what is going to give you the ultimate victory, not depending on people who belong to another country or people who belong to another time. It is depending on your own abilities, which will ensure you success. Okay, so this is what we have in the essay on self-reliance. Let me quickly recap what we did today. Now, when we started this lesson, I told you that Emerson, in this part of the essay, is going to be winding up his arguments. He started off by telling you that individuals must learn to rely on their own abilities and their own selves, and not be impressed by sheer numbers. And he gives certain examples, and he tells us that Americans, for example, are very impressed by what is happening in Europe or what is happening in Africa, and so they like to travel. This is where we started off the essay, where Emerson believes that traveling does not widen your horizons, or traveling does not add to your store of knowledge, and that Americans who feel that travels will broaden their horizons are living in a fool's paradise. And Emerson says that whatever you need is right here in the United States, and you have to stop depending on other people. You have to stop being impressed by other countries, because whatever you have is the best, and what other people have may be the best for them, but it is not the best for you. So whether you're talking about art, or you're talking about politics, or you're talking about religion, or science, you have everything in the United States, and you should not go around looking at what other countries have and be impressed by them. And this part of his argument, I told you, is very, very applicable to our situation in Pakistan. And you as students need to be aware of your own abilities, what you can do for your country, for your nation, without looking at outside sources, without looking at outside agencies and foreign governments. We need to become independent. We need to become independent in so many ways. And so Emerson wants the American youth to be strong and to depend on no other powers, to be impressed by no other powers but their own abilities. And he gives you the example of a person in the city, a young man in the city, and he says that when this young man has completed his studies, has completed the degree that he studied for, he wants to get a job at once in his own field. Whereas a person who comes from a small state, and he gives the example of New Hampshire and Vermont, and I gave you the example of Minnesota, for example, and he says that if this person coming from a smaller state does not get a job in one profession, he tries something else. The examples that Emerson gave were, he said that he will take up farming, he will work with somebody else, he will plow the land, he'll do manual labor. But a man sitting in the city thinks it's beneath his dignity to be working at anything other than what he has studied for. So this is something that Emerson says is to be avoided. If you cannot get work in one profession, you have to try other ways. Young men must not feel depressed because they are unable to work in their own profession or to put their degree to proper use. They have to make sure that they work, that they depend on their own selves, not wait for other people to provide them with jobs, or not wait for other people to come and give them money. They have to make sure that they depend only on their own resources. And in emphasizing reliance on the self, Emerson brings in the example of political leaders, and he says that political persons, when they enter the arena, they think that the greater the number of their supporters, the more successful they will be. But he says that that is not so, because when you have a lot of people around you, you stop relying on your own abilities and you start becoming dependent on other people, and therefore your dependence on other factors, on other people, decreases your focus on yourself, on the development of the self. And that is compulsory if you want to be a great politician or a great political leader. And the example that he gives at the very end, and which is again connected with numbers, is regarding property. Emerson says that we have started to identify people not with what they are, but what they have. And the people who have more property, who have more resources, we think that they are going to contribute to our success. So that if we get more money, we think we are more successful. But according to Emerson, that is a fallacy. We're just deceiving ourselves when we think that a lot of people around us means that we are very good. It does not mean that. Your triumph is the triumph of your principle, not of having a lot of people surrounding you. When you think that you have a lot of people in your support, or when you have a lot of voters, that does not mean that you become a great person. It just means that there are more people for you to depend on. And you stop depending on yourself. You stop focusing on your personal development, which is something that you get only when you stand firm on your principles. Do not go after property. Do not go after possessions. And this is the place where you have this most wonderful example that Emerson quotes, and which is a saying of Hazrat Ali Raziyallahu Ta'ala anhu, where he says that the Caliph Ali said that whatever you are to receive will come to you. Do not go running after it. We human beings spend our whole life accumulating wealth, accumulating property, because we think that there is security in numbers. But that is not so. We have to make sure that we depend on our own abilities, and that the work that we do is the best that we possibly can. It is only when we rely on our own selves, it is only when we depend on our own resources, and when we have the confidence that we can do the best, then and then only will we be able to do the best and to prove ourselves to this world. Thank you very much for being patient. Next class, we will start Bartleby the Scrivener. Thank you, and Allah Hafiz.